I'm going to talk about, it feels like the whole thing moved a little bit this way. Okay, so I'm going to talk about what I have as a box called Fundamentals today, and sort of go back over some key things like emergence, sort of save this to, long ago I sort of moved this to the middle of the course. And this year I also moved the introduction to the middle of the course apparently. So we might do some of that as well. Okay, so a couple of things. So assignments 8, 9, and 10 are alive, or should be, right? So 8, and so you'll see with 9 that it's just about the projects. It's a guideline for the projects. The goal is to record, like I said, 4-minute pieces per person. Teams are highly encouraged, not teams of 100, which would be impossible, but like small teams. You can work by yourself if you want, that's fine. And there's no pressure on this, but over the years, many papers have come out of POCs, and I'll sort of speed through some project ideas at some point. There are a few kind of main ones at the end of the assignment 9 piece. Okay, so all right, so that's some basic stuff. Let me get rid of this thing that's controlling everything. That seems like a bad idea. Okay, so I'm going to be away 2 weeks from now, and I'm going to go to the Center for Institute, so it's thematically acceptable. I will, and I'll mention a little bit more about that at some point. So I'll be away for the week, but I'll run lectures remotely through Teams. All right, so talk a bit more about that as that comes along. I think that's good. So yeah, it should be a Pox and Mox go on the road. I think Laurent is going to go as well. So anyway, and I will tell you why. That's basically why any of this exists on my side of things. Okay, all right, good. Okay, so this is sort of fundamentals. Lots of pieces in here, but I'm going to try to kind of hit on some really core things as we go through this. Things should work again. Oh, we can turn down the light. Yes, days with zero pain. Not many. It's 23 days now. Okay. Look after the vastus medialis is what I'm going to tell you. Okay, so, all right, so, wow, I feel really over here. All right, okay, so measuring this reference. This really, anything, what's this from? Yes? Yeah, the greatest opening of any movie ever. Anyway, all right, so, but this is sort of a thing that I find myself saying over and over again, probably to the annoyance of humans, but actually my name is Repeater, but the data poor, right? So this is where scientific fields go from being, data poor to data rich, and this data scarce to data rich. And that's not necessarily going to happen for every field, perhaps, but as long as there's some kind of way that remote sensing can come into play, from a science point of view, this is all very exciting. From an autocratic point of view, this is also very exciting. So, also Facebook. But, you guys have grown up in the time where the social phenomena is in the data rich category. It doesn't mean everything is being measured, right? So there's sort of a difficult business there. It's the same with ecological systems. We have satellites, right? We're measuring tremendous amounts of stuff, forests and all the weather data and so on. But we're not, we don't have a tracker on every squirrel or every ant. There's a vast amount of stuff that is unmeasured and probably never will be measured unless someone wants to hook up little backpacks to ants, and that's going to be a lot. We did have this idea years ago, my colleague Josh Weitz and I should share these. These are beautiful things. We were thinking about how trees fit together in forests, and we wanted, there just wasn't, there really, I don't know if there is now, but there wasn't a lot, there certainly wasn't big scale data on trees, right? Like actual tree shapes, like you've got some big oak tree and it's like, now we have it in the computer. It's a bit of a hut, right? So maybe we could put it together with lots of cameras and drones now, but we had an idea of tree butts, little things that would run around and measure stuff. Okay, so measurement, it's this big, so to the pouring data, that's the transition. Astrophysics, maybe 2000, right? Or astronomy, maybe 2000. Suddenly we have arrays of telescopes. It's not just one, it's now a whole bunch. It becomes hard for any one person can't quite sit there. Now you're doing computational things as well. This is, an older thing. It's from The Economist, 2010. So it's interesting to see it kind of age. But this was this was, and it's still, of course, this is still, gone further and further. Facebook, back in 2013, had 250 billion photos. I mean, these are just enormous numbers now, of course. But we were getting to these sort of transitions where telescopes, 140 terabytes of it, that's, it's a lot. And now we might think it's maybe not as much, but the physicists had kind of figured out how to throw away most of the data they got, right? So they would get huge amounts of data and then throw most of it away because they were really interested in some pieces, some very pre-specified pieces too. They're pretty careful about this. But yeah, so we've had to go through this list of, and of course, there's, stuff isn't being recorded. And when you think about everything that everyone says and everything that every organism, there's measurement in the sense that people are interacting, that, when trees fall in the forest, they do make a sound, right? This is a garbage thing from a long time ago. They do. And so, there's things, there's wind, there's all sorts of stuff happening, but it's not, it's recorded. I mean, it's very much in the memory of the tree. It's now on the ground, right? But it's not necessarily written down somewhere. This is terrible, and I'll try to improve that one day. But this sort of, we've had, as information has kind of grown, as data has grown, I should say, not information. Data has grown. We got to terabyte, and this was monster. This was like, that's going to be the limit, right? No one needs that. And, there are plenty of examples of people back here saying no one's going to need more than 4 megabytes of RAM. And now it's like, what's the max? Have 8 terabytes of the new ones, I think, for just, a laptop, right? I mean, it's absolutely absurd. My PhD, I did it with one Toshiba laptop that I had for years. Was like this golden thing for me. It had 800 megs on it, and so 0.8 gigs. And I had Windows and Linux, and then room. There was room. There was like 100 megs left over. I've got that brick somewhere. I should dig it up at one point. But petabyte, exabyte, zettabyte, yottabyte, this is right. These are old slides, and I should update them. But let me see. I don't think we've gotten beyond yottabyte. Obviously we're just making up words. We're going backwards there with that one. Obviously, I want the wiki. I want the complicated wiki. Simple wiki. Simple wiki is good. Yeah. It's a lot of stuff, and I think they just want to put it into the box here. Yeah. So we're still stuck on the yottabytes. It's a lot, right? So tremendous amount of data. And again, this is just stuff we're measuring. All right, fine. So you're used to lots of data. So this is just some examples. So this is in the last 10 years, and this paper came out in 2011. Science was a huge splash. We actually wrote a paper that's well cited. It's mentioned, it's now sort of part of all of this. Basically saying there are problems with this data set. They said Steven Pinker was on this, famed bullshitter, and Martin Novak, famed friend of Jeffrey Epstein. So Harvard doing well there. But the principle is also, one of the other authors is Google Books, right? The Google Books team. So that's God knows how many humans who were at least referenced in the author list, but we don't really want to say their names. Yeah. But this data set was very exciting. They called it culturomics, and it was books, right? So it's books going back to the 1500s across a number of languages, not too many, I suppose, but English, Chinese, Russian, French was in there, German, and it's a year scale data set. And the problem with this is, and we've talked about types and tokens, especially in that allotaxonometry stuff, and we had some examples from it. The problem with this is it's sort of this weird intermediate stage. So you go to a library, and this is this big criticism here. There are two pieces. One is you go to a library and you say, okay, I'm going to read every book, just beginning to end, and then you kind of have this sense of how many times the word "the" was used, or butterfly, or whatever, right? Then you make a big counting of that. So it's different to a lexicon, right? It's more than that. You do have how often words are used, but you're ignoring completely how often each page was read, or how often the books were borrowed, right? Which, oh, okay, rhyming slang for trouble. Sorry, I grew up with rhyming slang, so no one knows what anyone means until you do. I apologize for that. I have a couple of other little things, yeah. So what's the story is a kind of a greeting thing. Instead of like in the US, it's what's up, and the other person says not much, unless there's something wrong with them. I mean, it's just sort of interaction. What's the story is a good one. What's the story with this? It's a nice kind of question. But that became what's the John Dory with this, which is just, and that's what this is. A fish, and it really has there's no sensibleness. Um, yeah, yeah. The best rhyming slang is when you drop the rhyming part, and then yeah. Okay, so it's all nonsensical. But anyway, this was all this. That's the problem with this. It's not measuring popularity. Is what I'm trying to say there. But the other thing is, it looks like they just fed, and it gets even more problematic after 2000, where they're doing different things because we're trying to get time series out of this. They just dumped science into it and medical literature. So you can see. So for example, this is frequency of just I think it's 1883, 1910, and 1950, and you can see how often they were talked about. This is just in all of English. How often that word, right, just the number, was talked about. So, really long books that would pick up the page number, maybe that's not really the issue here. So there's this story that came out of this, which is, there's a spike in, talking about now, and there's a long memory of it, but that spike grows higher and it decays faster, right? So this is like speeding up of everything. But in fact, that's an imprint of science, right? So if you look at scientific terms like figure with a capital F, it's going up, and we did some forensics to kind of see that that's the case. So there are two problems. It's an incredibly interesting data set, but it needs to be rebuilt, and this is part of our Story Wrangler project. We have a PhD student who did a ton of work to do this, but we still have to finish publishing it. But it's this is super exciting. This is the first time we had this sort of big scale representation, text representation of the past. Before that, I think we'd done things. We'd done things. Other people had used music lyrics was a good one. Of course, it's only 50, 60, 70 years. State of the Union speeches was a useful one to give you sort of a sense of what happened. What's accessible, what's written down. Okay. So this is, I say describe plus explain, right? This is basic science. I know this may seem childish to you, and it is kind of grade 4 stuff, but I found myself over time being a scientist having to kind of say this and put it into things. It's part of the Vermont Complex Systems Center sort of banner. And this describe part has always been hard, but it's become really, really, really difficult and challenging when you have a lot of data. You have to be very, very careful. But it is ultimately old school science. We're going to describe things and try to explain it, and it goes round and round and round. And then what you work on, and I know I had this in the sort of coda at the very start of the year. You have to choose meaningful things to work on, things that will help the world, and so on. Well, if you're a bad person, the opposite, I suppose. But this is Lord Kelvin, large brain human. To measure is to know, and if you cannot measure, you cannot improve it. So these are strong statements. People might argue with this. Of course, these are always we're always cherry picking these sorts of things. X-rays will prove to be a hoax. You can quote Newton, but you don't want to quote most of what he said because. What else we got here? Nothing new to be discovered in physics. We're all good. This is late 1800s. And all that remains is more and more precise measurement. So quantum, obviously, a bit of it remains deeply upsetting to humans, and of course a great source of storytelling. People love it. Physicists really let a lot run. It's good. Yeah, sure, multiple universes. Great. Anyway, so more and more precise, and of course chaos came along, dynamical systems, and this idea that even if you have a completely deterministic system, it is fundamentally unpredictable, can be fundamentally unpredictable. And that's really shocking, right? I think it was it Lagrange? Lagrange was wandering around saying the whole thing is a clock, and we could predict everything. And then someone said, "What about God?" And he's like, it's just tricky business, right? You don't want a Galileo sort of situation. You don't want to, kind of back off the story a little bit. Okay, but this is measuring time, right? So just think about some of the most basic things. We're so happy with this measuring business. We all sort of arrive at the same time because we've got all these clocks. I'm sorry about that. Speaking of things, it was behaving. So we figured out the time thing and put some huge stones in the ground, right? And that was pretty good, right? This whole season thing used to seem to come back, and we could kind of really nail it after a while. Apparently, Dodd, the name Dodd comes from Celtic. This is obviously garbage, but it comes from uh, ancient sort of Celtic things. And there's the megalithic dot is some measurement, unit of measurement. They were supposed to be the surveyors of um, the Druids, but you know, it is a pretty poison line, I'm going to say. So anyway, obviously, it's personal information. Anyway, so but then sundials. We used sundials for a long time. Really into the sundials. Walking around with a sundial on your own. Like pretty good. You still see them and floating around in some older places. Europe and so on. They're just sitting on the yeah. One of our sort of a good friend who lives here locally. It's his thing. He builds these elaborate, amazing, very complicated sundials that do all sorts of things. Um, he does install them all around the country, which is good. They're real works of art. There's one at Echo, for example. Yeah, yeah. It's sunny sometimes, but often, yeah, you wouldn't want to, right, go and show your friends, or say we're going to see it today. Yeah. Um, yeah. So this is measurement, right? We're really struggling with this, and then and then we get the whole pendulum thing. It's pretty good, but you can't put them on a ship. It's not going to work out. So then there's a whole game to build more reliable measurements of measuring time, and that's I found this a charming book back in the day, but it's about measuring where are you in the world, right? If you're floating around the boat, this is terrible business. But ships kept getting into trouble because they knew the latitude, but people did not know the longitude, and so there was a huge amount of work went into trying to figure it out from the stars, and very elaborate things, right? So this was thought to be probably the way it would go, but then there was Harrison, and I think and his son, or just sort of a small partnership that eventually built these mechanical clocks that would just work, and you could take them with you wherever you wanted, and they were very reliable and didn't need to be wound up too much and so on. And if you go to Greenwich, the old ones are the original ones, the quite elaborate things are on display there. But yeah, really went against the grain and managed to measure it. But that's the 1700s. It's when we get pretty good clocks. Of course, now we got the general relativity thing. We needed that because it's a bit, it's a bit tricky. That's GPS needs that. We had to put the things up in space, which was kind of a remarkable business as well. So in terms of, measurement, we got to this point where we have satellites, and that's an absurd, expansion of our measurement capacity. But also part of that is, we know where we are, and so Sputnik went up. America and various other countries, were alarmed, and then you got a lot of STEM education back then, I suppose. But about 2 or 3 weeks later, apparently the story was someone in the US said, because they're figuring out where Sputnik was, right? So they're doing this thing trying to figure out where it was. So just trying to do that to track it. And then someone said, we could figure out, so if there are we need 3 points on the ground to figure out where Sputnik is. If we had 3 satellites, we could figure out where we were. And that was like a real moment, which is really remarkable and allows people to advertise it to you on your phone. Well done. But also, people like to run around and track where they are. It's good. If you take a photo, it's like you have a time stamp and a space stamp for where it was. That's amazing. Yeah, so that's measuring time. It's really recent. We got there. This is the sort of madness that would happen. This is just distance, right? This is just such a basic thing. But this is the English. But points and points are still floating around, and pico twips and barleycorns, inches we've had for a while. But this is an attempt to kind of connect it all in terms of. And then here's the metric system sitting out here, trying to be awesome, but is not 12 and is actually not that great. Anyway, we're stuck with it. But this is basically French-English kind of fight. But yeah, rods and poles and perches. I think I grew up with these words, furlong, right? Furlong and a chain, right? That's the length of a cricket pitch. Anyway, as I remember. Okay, so this is, obviously not an ideal system. Measuring temperature. Measuring temperature. So this is, it's just a splash here, but so this is somewhat disputed, I think, but basically, there's a sort of story that people back in the 1500s, so Galileo comes up with some kind of temperature, but the story in here, just to sort of say it quickly, is basically you would never be able to measure temperature. That's a weird, like, yes, it's warmer than yesterday. We might all agree with that, but there's some other texture to temperature that seems unmeasurable, right? People have different experiences of it. And of course, you're sort of rooting it in yourself, your experience, which is, should be irrelevant, of course. But these kind of ideas, right? So, damp cold, dank cold, frosty cold, crisp cold, humid heat. How do you, and then we know, of course, you have humidity is a separate thing. You have to measure that separately. It took a while. Blah, 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 blah. So basically, people thought it was impossible, and it's really kind of the 1800s where we start to get reliable things. And we wrote a paper that was just sort of, years ago about what I called the telotherm, which is like the solstice, right? So solstice is sun stop, and that's it's so reliable that we could put these trilithons and set them up, and be excited every year, and probably have drum circles and so on, and maybe sacrifice some people. No one does it anymore, of course, but because we have a pyramid, it's fun. So the telotherm, the idea of that was, well, measuring temperature is recent, and we don't, we have records now that are over 100 years in some places, so we can statistically kind of look at when the warmest and coldest days of the year are. And so for here, it's about Groundhog's Day. That's the coldest day of the year, which is 5 or 6 weeks after the shortest day. And it's quite textured as you go across the US, and then as you go through time, it's actually been changing in a very non-simple way. So from a climate change point of view, it's an interesting tool. And of course, when spring starts, an important thing. And the thing that's perhaps most famously connected to this is the cherry blossoms, right? In Japan, the date of the first, I think maybe in Kyoto, the date of the first cherry blossom has been written down by monks, always the monks, for over 1,000 years, I think. So you've got this incredible time series.
There's something called degree days.
It's a
trees to bloom, there has to be a certain number of days that are like over 45 degrees.
Right. I mean, it really does connect to temperature. It's great. Yeah.
Arbitrarily what the temperature is. It has to be a certain number of days that reaches a certain
and then it's a threshold thing. It's a dosage, right? Yeah. Yeah, and that has taken a bit of a turn recently. But yeah, good recording. Yeah, record all the things. Okay. So data. So this depends on you, right? So this is thinking. So this is thinking. And many people, you should stay here. This is fine, right? A lot of people like to stay here and kind of oscillate between these two. Probably not spend too much time here because of, just, yeah. But, and then there's this, you see. So you want to either stay in places like philosophy is pretty good, pure math is pretty good, pretty safe, nice bubbles. Don't go out here. You're in trouble. Because the world closes down, and I think what's happened is our theories have become kind of lamp or street lamps or lampshades for what we think is possible. It's a classic human thing, sadness. Anyway, and then the cycle repeats. But eventually you square things, right? Oh, I apologize.
Enough! You are all of you beneath me. I am a god, you dull creature, and I will not be bullied by that.
Puny god. Which is what Greenspan said about after the 2008 collapse. Anyway, I don't know why I did this. So, I have a few more fun things with it. But the charms of the many rung paths. Yes, more Indiana Jones. I'm sorry. There are some elevated things like Borges, but okay. So, I'll try not to be too much on the 80s stuff. But let's see. So. This is the holy grail, right? There are many things to choose from, and it's easy to go in the wrong direction. And we're kind of bad at saying, please don't go down that path, like board it up. We don't really do that very well, and we tend to flock around the wrong holy grail for long periods of time. Science is socially constructed. I mean, we're figuring out truths that other people figure out a truth, but how we kind of map through that space, um, it depends on where we were before, and what's going to make money and all these sorts of things. It's very complicated, right? And there are whole areas that are explored that were just bad ideas. It just didn't. I mean, in retrospect, right? Well, maybe at the time as well. But anyway, so knowledge of dead monks. This is supposed to be sort of a thing towards Newton, who was messing around trying to figure out the 1/r² thing, and apparently in his notes kind of has not just a bunch of different powers. He's just like messing around and trying to get it right and so on. You can see why it should work, because it's this like the volume of or the surface area of a sphere growing out. I mean, maybe gravity doesn't work like that, but it has that feel. Anyway, that's a Terry Pratchett reference, actually. Huh. Wow. Okay, so because he went and worked for the Mint, right? So Newton retired at 40 and went to Wall Street, basically. Although a little better, he went to the Mint. So you need these kind of lists, and we just don't do it. We just don't have that. Science is weird. We always want to publish a new exciting thing and pretend with a question mark title that lure people in. It's wrong. So we've gotten to a point where we understand there are limits to what we can describe, right? So this is a space we can't go down into. This is an incredible achievement. And then there's just the stuff beyond the speed of light, right? So how far light could have traveled in whatever it is, 14 billion years. Other universes, this is material for this is good story material, basically. It's where that seems to work best. Rick and Morty obviously has a festival with the multiverse thing, all the DC stuff. I think Marvel's going to do it now. Parallel paths. I mean, it's just fiction and joy. Anyway, so these are huge ranges. We've talked about these ranges before, but I have these pieces in here. Just like science is, just the term science is a relatively new thing, right? With philosophers and so on, but this idea of a scientist, maybe it's decaying a little bit. This is using the Engrams viewer, so it's what we can do with it is basically test to see if something exists or not. When does it take off? Even if the popularity part is a bit complicated, right? Anyway, so scientists, blah blah blah. Okay, so a few other things about measurement then. Maybe I don't need that slide. So measurement, right? Okay, so look at this thing. This is good. This is a real sign, apparently, in California. So it's funny, but we kind of do this a lot, and it's not so good for Buckingham Pie, right? So you should. I mean, you could add a pre-factor here, right? A conversion factor, which people would do, right? Ultimately, money works in this way. Somehow we figure out how something's worth, what something's worth, usually, in some complicated way. There's some stuff, there's some social construction. So we like to do that. So this is I'm just going to talk about this generally for complex systems. There's an enormous trap that we fall into of measuring money, right? We love to have a single scale. We can rank things. We can rank colleges. We can rank countries. We can rank people. People love it. They love it. And of course, it's gameable potentially if you know what's going on. But what you really want for a lot of systems is more like the radar charts, or at least bar graphs or something. Like, here are these 10 different things that matter about it. We do this. We've achieved this as scientists in, say, some areas like ecology, for example. Like, here are all these thresholds you could cross where things fall apart. Because things going wrong, there are lots of ways for things to go wrong, right? So you don't want one big measure, like flying a plane. You don't want just one number in front of you that said plane is flying well, plane is flying badly, right? It's not a useful thing. You have to have lots of instruments in that case. And, all of them could be good except this one over here, and that's meaningful. An emotional apparatus does this too, right? Something is bad in front of us. We don't just think this is bad. We have fear or disgust or anger. We have some resolution there. And, not just us, but organisms of all kinds, right? So it's hard to get rid of this, but lots of examples, GPA, this, like I said, college rankings, city rankings. We love these things, the Michelin guide. This leads to terrible problems for chefs, of course. Wine scores are basically like this. Um, yeah, and they're people really. It's hard not to rate my professor. Uh, so bad. But it's true that if I see someone new and they may be applying for a job and they don't have any information, you're like, what is their Google Scholar? If they don't have one, that's a disaster. But if they're Google Scholar, so you fish around in there and then you look at rate my professor. So bad. Anyway, body mass index. Yes, this one's been talked about for a long time, but it's still being measured for babies, like it's crazy. By this measure, right, like some big buff person is obese or something. IQ, right? So, in the drive, especially for the last couple of 100 years, there was a huge effort to measure social phenomena going, 1800s into the 900s, and a lot of this is then tied to eugenics. Effective temperature, it's like this is what it's sort of effectively like, which is kind of absurd to me. Like, we can handle temperature, humidity, and whether it's raining or not. Like, it's good to have a little like a small dashboard, which you have on these things. But anyway, of course, price, so that puts everything onto one dimension, which is rather remarkable, right? So that it's an incredible construction money that we can encode belief. It's sort of gone off the rails a little bit, but well, a little bit. Anyway, so it's a one-dimensional mapping of everything. So complex phenomena under one line. And if you go to there's one book, I guess I won't say that. Well, Tiani Bayam. I came across some who was at BU for a while, but then started the New England Complex Systems Institute, NEXI. I remember I actually found the front page. I think I mentioned. So I found this front page of notes I took because I took a course from him at BU in 1995. I was at MIT and I didn't have anything with complex systems, so I thought, all right, I'll try something. But he eventually tried to produce this thing that did this for complexity of organisms, right? So people were sort of doing information theory, I think, like bits, the number of bits you'd need to encode a person versus a chimpanzee or whatever, and he had a list. I saw him talk about that at the Santa Fe Institute Summer School, and basically the room revolted. They just went berserk. I have this sort of memory of him running away to get to a flight, but also just running away. Okay, so salary, yes, always good. Stock market valuations, complexity of civilizations. There's work on that now, which is one number to rule them all. I've tried to kind of write up a thing to sort of go against this. Let me find it. This is amazing. There you go. A single dimension of complexity for all civilizations. It's pretty awesome. There you go. Lots of people. Peter Turkin is the main character here. He's at University of Connecticut. But this is the game they try to rank. They try, going back in time, that what they're trying to do is say, okay, these are, this is, they come up with this, right? So this is how sophisticated are these elements of a culture over time. So some of the, this is going back thousands of years. And then they do SVD on it, and basically what they find is everything matters. So the interpretation that this is, so what this really is an Anna Karenina story, right? For something to hold together, everything has to be working. This is the Jared Diamond. I know we sort of argue against, but the basic idea of guns, germs, and steel is like, for something to kind of succeed, you need to have a bunch, something probably, you have a bunch of things working, and then when it falls apart, you can just have one of these things collapse. Bitcoin, or whatever. Or, Genghis Khan turns up. Not great. Like everything's going well, but now there's Genghis Khan. So like that's that's a transition, or there's a volcano explodes or something like that, right? So there are reasons for things to fall apart. No one believes anything about facts anymore is also probably a bad place to be in. So anyway, I think they're basically saying that all of these things matter and you need them in equal weightings, and then you could just sort of add that number up. But that's anyway. All right, okay. But do you see the draw of this, right? This is just so powerful to people they can't help themselves. I think, yeah. Let me try to figure out how that works. how do we move around in this silly thing? The only reason I use it is because it does work well in, it's the only thing that shows videos, which of course are crucial to the educational aspect of what I'm trying to do here. Oh, I can't remember how to do it. I thought it was that one. Nope. Nope. Okay. All right. Okay. Anyway, we're close enough. Okay. I'll have to figure that out. Okay. So that was a, you know, and then of course we have a 1D axis for political beliefs, right? So this is what this is a spatial trap. This is a 1D spatial metaphor trap that we fell into, and it's very hard to climb out of. People say, well, let's have a social axis and economic axis, and that's 2 dimensions. It is helpful. It's better, right? It's better. And then we got a map. We can kind of do that. If it's 3D, no. You know, we have so much trouble with just rendering 3D in ways that is useful. I mean, you can make a globe or something, but and we should be much better now we have these computer things, but we're still sort of stuck on the 2D representations. But this is, you know, as I understand it, right, eventually they just said this, right, so the French Parliament was like, we'll call them the left and the right, because they were sitting on the left and the right, depending on who's facing which way, which is confusing. And of course we have this unfortunate thing in English, right, that right means good. So that's a little bit of an unfortunate collision. But we love to spatially, like for spatial metaphors, terrific. We spatialize time. You know, it was a long time, a short time. If we can anchor things in, you know, like, you know, it's all behind us now, right? All these things. Someone's up above you morally. I mean, okay, you know. No, it's not every cultures have different things, right? Sometimes time, you know, goes the other way to people's. But you know, now we're in this trap, and that's a hard one to get out of. And of course, then it becomes sort of a bit of a mixed loop where people start to think there's only left and right, and then it becomes not 1D but 0D because it becomes binary. There's just right and left, and then you're really in the soup. There are old studies looking at politicalcompass.org. I'm not sure if it exists still, but you could answer a bunch of questions, these semantic differential things, and then, you know, they place you on a map, and you could see how you compared to Gandhi or Stalin, you know, famous political characters, you know, because they sort of they were in some parts of this map. But you know, more and more it can fall into this binary thing where there's, you know, and it's us versus them. Very powerful. So if there is, you know, higher complexity, which often there is, how do you maintain that in telling people things, you know, trying to represent it? Because the problem is these stories will win. This is much easier if you turn up and say, hey, I've got a one-dimensional space and here's a ranking of everything on it, and maybe you make some money out of it or whatever. It's just it's a powerful thing. Just some places where this is a little spread out, and we have some, you know, this connects to, this is sort of allied to some of this work we've done on meaning and work that is ongoing in our lab. But this is the so-called ocean breakdown for personality. It's a bit funny. It's sort of the big five or the 5-factor model, the various ways of talking about it. But there's ocean or canoe. People use those terms to represent it. But this is a 5-dimensional space for personality. Now, I guess what we're not sure about, I mean, I've seen this, you know, this has been used for a long time now, certainly back into the 90s when it's sort of crystallizing, lots of people sorting things out. I'm not really sure in general for people within a culture, like what the balance of these is supposed to be. You know, but this is sort of a thing coming out of SVD again, right? This is an SVD type business, or PCA, if you're familiar with that terminology. There's going to be some general, you know, some of these will be more important than others. It's usually the case. But yeah, the sort of negative one maybe is here, but they all have a negative opposite, right? So closed, you know, you're withdrawn, lazy, introverted, which is not necessarily bad, but there's an opposite. So these are a bit unfortunate that I mean, this is a difficult thing, you know, how do you define something which is really a spectrum? A disagreeable gets to more like angry as well. It's a little more than disagreeable. Like Voldemort is disagreeable. Yeah.
Do you want the order there, like in terms of factors?
Oh,
I
okay.
don't know exactly what size they are, but one is extroversion,
Okay.
two is agreeableness, three is conscientiousness, four is neuroticism, and five is openness.
Oh, so this is really,
Yeah.
and that's from some stuff, right? I mean, because I know you've been looking at this, yeah.
Yeah, and apparently not independent.
Okay, also good. So these are not really right angle things. I want to write that down. Can you just say that again?
One
Was
was
E,
two was agreeableness, three is conscientiousness, four is neuroticism, and five is openness.
Eekno.
Yeah, I guess that doesn't sound
It doesn't sound good, but that's what you've got to say because this is, I mean, people have done all this work and then you overlay a word on top of it, which is madness, right? You're just like, what are you doing, people? Like, anyway, all right, I'm sorry. I'm going to complain about it. Also, canoe. Is canoe, which one is best, actually? Ocean is terrible, right? Because the O is at the wrong end. It's not so bad. Anyway, we could do a little rank comparison. Okay, so that's interesting. So that's the big one. And then this is interesting, interesting, interesting. Huh. Okay. Because extroversion, I don't think is in the power danger thing explicitly, right?
It's like some people have it high on like dominance. They have it similar to dominance.
Okay.
There's been a lot of kerfuffling, I think.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a definitely. I believe the term is clusterfuffle. Yeah. But we've gotten somewhere, and so we think there are 5 dimensions, and then this is stuck. Of course, this is allegedly used by Cambridge Analytica, some version of this, and all these other whatever Facebook might use it. Who knows what's going on with some of that stuff? Myers-Briggs things floating around. Every corporations love the Myers-Briggs. Enneagram, that's another good one. Enneagram, familiar with that one? Yeah, that's a good one. There's like 9 types of humans. Yeah, yeah. I mean, right. So we're excited. I mean, of course, um, the star signs, right? Like everyone born in this month is the same, which is amazing. We're really excited about the star thing because of that reliability of the stars. I mean, disaster is bad star, right? That's where it comes from. It's one of my favorite words. Um, but it's also, just encoders like, well, what could we do? The stars were misaligned, right? It's just a great abdication of responsibility. It's fantastic. Okay, so anyway, people are excited about this, but here's an example. It's self-reported, of course. It's fine. What was my bigger concern? Oh, mass manipulation. So that's a problem. Yeah. Um, but this is a study that looked at the U.S. states. So always the 48, the 50 states, I guess, plus DC. Much better, by the way, of course, to do these with little squares or hexagons, right? Those kinds of maps. That's infinitely better for this sort of thing. I think I showed it for lexicocalorimeter, but that's something that kind of emerged in the last 10 years. It's much, much better. So these are, this is openness, so which we think is not as important now, but of course we don't quite trust the whole thing. Extroversion, so not really. Vermont's like, and we found this for a happiness thing. Vermont's pretty happy, but it has a small standard deviation. It's a little closed down. New England style. And so this is it's self-reported, right? But this is sort of some dimensions. Then we go to agreeableness. Well, see, friendly, or at least seemingly. And then conscientiousness is this one up here. Interesting. Wow. Huh. So we're lazy. Okay. And neuroticism was an interesting one because it's kind of connects some places that are pretty often at different ends of things. It's through here. There's Appalachia, Louisiana, Mississippi, and then the New England. So it's interesting. All right, but I mean, this is this is some study, and we've got maps, so now it's like true. But Dungeons and Dragons completely understood it, right? They're not going to give you one roll of the dice and you're a 17. What's that?
I think it's like a bad map. It has to relate like how we think to like maybe where we live, but like I don't know. That's like I think there's more to be done than just like a map.
Yeah.
Why does Alaska never change?
I'm sure this is low data, but it's Vermont's going to have low data as well. But you're right. I think maybe, no, Hawaii's in there, right? That's moving around a little bit. Pretty neutral. They just have a different, this is not that they're in the sixth and seventh dimensions of personality. They don't register on the, no, I don't know. I have no idea. It could be, we'd have to look at the data and look at how low they are. So maps are useful to some point, and I've kind of had this long thing. At least you need a ranked list as well. That's helpful, right? Um, but immediately it tells you if there are geographic correlations. I think that where we are now in the world, because of social media, because of communication, which starts with the telegraph, right? The telegraph is the first time you get distant, like immediate communication across vast distances about whatever's happened. You know, like there's rain coming, or the crops failed, or whatever it is. Um, you know, that's the first big transition. But eventually, it's like everyone's connected to everyone, sort of thing. And you know, people here and here can be watching the same thing at the same time. That's really weird. That's really weird, and that's not 1700s Constitution time, right? Where you're setting up and saying these are kind of quasi-independent. That's the idea, right? It's a federated states. It's a good. I mean, from a complex systems robustness idea, this is a good. It's good to have these sort of separated things because you get innovation. You know, you can. There are bad things that can happen as well, right? But you get innovation. Right? It's sort of loose. And what you need, of course, in times of like something terrible happening, like a world war, you need to come together, right? And of course, the ultimate one is an alien invasion, which a pandemic is. It's an alien invasion. And in this case, we're the troops, right? We're the ones who carry the thing. Wittingly or unwittingly, we become the troops of this thing. So that's something where you've got to, we had so many movies about this. We've had the drill, like we've got to come together. There's the Independence Day. Anyway, it's I don't know. Maybe it's not dangerous enough. Or you need monsters with tentacles or something, but then it would be pretty much game over, I'm sure. Anyway. Okay, yeah. Good, well done here, very good. Really thought about it. The alignment charts, of course, have worked beautifully. We had the requisite discussion of community. There was bagel. I've been rewatching it again just for happiness. Yeah, so you can argue. Of course, people argue about this, right? So, this is from a Reddit thread where naturally the choices are enthusiastically debated. Then there are. Let me see if I can find this. I mean, alignment charts took on a whole world of themselves. I think there's one. I think there's an Atlantic.
There's a really good T one.
Well, okay. So this is from. Let me just. We've got a few things. So this is just last year, right? And this is basically, they're used everywhere. This is bookmark alignment chart. The dog ear. It's fair. I once borrowed a book from a friend, a guy from Barcelona, and I brought it back the next, like 2 days later, and it was slightly touched a bit because I took it in my bag, and he was so angry, and I felt so bad, and I remember him just saying, "Books are forever." And I'm just like, okay, maybe it's time for me to leave. I didn't dog ear it, but I guess I touched it. Yeah. So this is a fun article about this, but it's humans trying to put things on 2 dimensions, right? This is not. I don't think that one's going to pop. She had some others. There's got to be an XKCD, right? And it's going to be the alignment chart of alignment charts, right? God, this is a lot in here. Oh, so political compass. See, there's the one I was talking about, actually. Yeah. Vowel chart. Yes. Linguistics. This is great. Oh, this is where comes from. So this is lawful good. So, right, we actually know something about the world. This is real. I don't like those charts, but anyway. Oh, yeah, phase diagram. Very good. Oh, but lawful neutral. Interesting. And what is, ooh, Oh, that's the whole thing. Yeah, okay. Okay. Got to do it. Got to go for the rollover. It is, I would describe my personal alignment as lawful heterozygous silty liquid. Okay. It's just wrong. And then there's an alignment chart of maps. I thought that was a good one too. This one, Reddit. Thank you, Reddit. I mean, maps are, fundamentally political things, right? And people get very upset about maps for good reasons. Cartographers are, wow. Oh, that's Antarctica at the middle, sort of. Oh, what is that? Is that actually a map? That's amazing. Lawful good. There you go. I mean, we have globes, right? And we have Google Earth. But I will say the Jacaranda Atlas that we had as kids in Australia. I remember realizing at some point that there was what was called political map, and the equator was here, 2/3 of the way down the page. So it had this Australian sort of theme to the whole thing, but Australia's down here, like just being this little blob, and Greenland's like this monster. So this is like a 3-to-1 ratio, but it's the other way around. I'm like, what? New Zealand is missing from a lot of maps. It's a whole deal, right? You know this, right? Yeah. Politicians get involved. It's like you left us off the map. I get, like, the Olympics or whatever, like all sorts of things. Like lots of things. I remember the Commonwealth Games, which is the Olympic Games, but for England's fast decaying empire. There was this thing where these kids this was in Brisbane. Kids are running around like making a map of Australia. They'd forgotten about Tasmania. They just left Tasmania off. Just didn't do it. Tasmanians went berserk. You're in your own country doing your own thing. Anyway, ridiculous. Anyway, lots of alignment charts. So people are, but there's really something to it, and we put it into our.
Statistically, there is an example that I saw in the last 2 days. What part of the United States has the highest vaccination rate?
Oh, Puerto Rico. Yeah, right. That's right. Yeah, Puerto Rico's status as being part of the U.S. is, yeah. You would have thought Hurricane Maria did help a little bit. With that knowledge, like maybe going up a little, but I don't know. There's a lot of confusion about that aspect. Yes, and well done to them, of course. Yeah. Okay, and then I have a couple more of these videos, and these are about measuring. These are the measuring with one number things. Yeah.
Holly is ruining Michael's life. He thinks she's so special, and she's so not. Her personality is like a 3. Her sense of humor is a 2. Her ears are like a 7 and a 4. Add it all up, and what do you get? 16. And he treats her like she's a perfect 40. It's nuts.
Am I really that shallow?
Listen, back in Jacksonville, I was in charge of a 60-person dance group. Whenever we auditioned a new dancer, we would rate them in 5 categories: dancing ability, coolness, dopeness, freshness, and smart-brained. I would give you an 8 in every category.
But 8 isn't bad, I suppose.
Oh, no. 8 is the best. It was a scale of 1 to 13, but 8 was highest. The scale went up and then back down like a 10.
Why? It's not important.
It's really some good science there. People get it. They get it. That's good. What's that? That thing? Yeah. It was a bit of a peak in humanity. Yeah. The second episode of the second season is ridiculous. But it wasn't rated super high. Yeah, right? No. No, that one I'm like, you like burning story, just burning story. Unbelievable. All right, let's get out. Right. It was sad. This is my peak experience in life.
I was like, this is it. I just did it. I'm done.
You want the Troy's My Emotions line. I know. I actually felt bad for what is Mike Schur because it's kind of hard to. What do you do after that? Yeah.
No, people always talk like, oh, it's so bad when you finish like your favorite show. And like, they should just like read books. But like, here, this was actually how I felt. I was
Yeah.
like, this was amazing.
Well, some shows are really rewatchable, right?
I'm great. This show's beautiful. I'm recovered now, but like, it was a lot of time, you know?
It's good. I'm pleased this venue is.
I
Yeah.
can't rewatch it.
I did not expect to be this. Yeah. Okay.
Just can't do it.
All right. Okay. So let's talk about. So the emergence of structure, right? So, right, this is this profound thing. We see it over and over and over. Right. This is somehow we get hurricanes and tornadoes and these sorts of things out of swirly things out of little building blocks that are just next to each other. Thinking, the thinky bit, pretty weird. We're still thinking about this thing too, which apparently has lots of extra thinky bits in it. And right, somehow we get stories. Yeah. So this is Wikipedia. This is a while ago. So it comes from philosophy, the term, and you're right, the original term, but depends how it's phrased, right? So it refers to the way complex systems arise out of these sort of simple interactions. Yeah, I mean, fair enough. But basically, more is different is the big story, I think, which is that, there's nothing, there's no, I mean, I have this little line, right? There's no tornado in a water molecule. There's no financial collapse in a dollar bill. There's no love in a carbon atom. And I've sort of expressed this in various ways, and people thought it was a poem or something. So now it appears around the world. Anyway, but, yet very controversial. Well, I mean, this is it's kind of funny. I mean, I don't know we could look at what Wikipedia says now, but it's interesting to kind of see it framed in that way at some point. But I'll talk a little bit about how people kind of have gotten into some trouble. Okay, of course. Even art as well. So larger entities, right? Interaction with smaller, simple ones. So this is where they get it right? So larger entities exhibit properties that are not present in the smaller ones. Okay. And so 1875, right? So it's, I mean, again, recent, right? A lot of this stuff is so recent, relatively. I mean, it's generations now, but.
Fireflies are something that we have all loved as kids, right? Catching them in the backyard, putting them in a jar and watching them glow. So we don't tend to think of them as anything all that mysterious. Well, they do one thing very nicely, which is flash on and off.
That's all fireflies do, flash. But what interests Steve Strogatz, a mathematician at Cornell University, is that there are places in the world,
not here, but in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia or Thailand,
where fireflies don't just flash randomly, like we're used to. They somehow flash together.
There are enormous congregations of fireflies along riverbanks.
How many?
It could be tens of thousands. Tree after tree, extending for literally miles along the rivers, all flashing in sync like a Christmas tree. Rows and rows of Christmas trees all wired together going off. And it's one of the most hypnotic and spellbinding spectacles in nature, because you have to keep in mind it is absolutely silent. I mean, picture it. There's a riverbank in Thailand in the remote part of the jungle. You're in a canoe, slipping down the river. There's no sound of anything, maybe the occasional, exotic jungle bird or something. And you're looking and you just see whoop, 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 with thousands of lights on and then off, all in sync.
Because no one knows.
There are literally 10 theories.
What seems to be clear, says Steve, is there is no one firefly that makes it all happen. It just happens on its own. Order materializes out of nothing. And that has him puzzled.
How can order come out of disorder? I mean, this is what the creationists love to talk about. And it's because they don't understand, and neither do we. This is the big mystery of science. I think bigger than black holes or bigger than superstrings. I mean, science has had hundreds of years of success since the time of Galileo and Newton, from reductionism, from looking at the smallest parts, whether they're genes or atoms, whatever. That's great. We need to understand the individuals. But that's not enough.
So that holds up. As I said, Radiolab up and down. But this is from way back when. This is, let's see if my link still works. No, maybe it's just doesn't directly go to it. But yeah, way back in season 1. So yeah, here's my thing. Oh, I can't remember where things are. So yeah, I mean, he lays it out. I mean, this is a huge deal. But we do understand these things, and some of them we do understand some of them. And I'll kind of come back to, I think, fluid mechanics is this incredible example of us understanding complex systems behavior from first principles. It's something we could do with pencil and paper, and then experiments and all these things. But so yeah, I mean, somehow we go from particles, quarks in particular, right, to everything. We have this little code sitting here that gives us organisms. There's a lot of stuff going on, but it's kind of a remarkable collective behavior from people. This is just a gigantic, issue that we keep trying to understand. If you think about all this work in behavioral economics, for example, that's won lots of Nobel Prizes or some. It's still kind of absent thinking about people connected together, right? That we just had a Nobel Prize for complex systems kind of research, but there's a potentially in the future, people I think will have done some really profound things, thinking about networks, but also other kinds of emergence properties. Because we will have gotten beyond, hopefully collectively we'll have somehow gotten beyond this idea that only the fundamental things matter, right? Which has been a predilection for a while. But I will say with networks, and I'll say it again, groups are the big thing to think about. And sociology, they've got it in the name. That's what socio means. It means groups. So people behave in groups, and there are networks of groups, and that's the big story. Okay, but yeah, like time is very, very strange, and it gets very worrying to think about. Some people are desperate to find granular structure at the bottom of everything, or sort of that someone's just making it from the outside. That's an explanation, but it's I don't know, platypuses. Yeah. All right. So somehow, these something is giving rise to time. Something's giving rise. Even gravity. Gravity's right. We can describe it. We've got general theory of relativity is fantastic. Just the basic one works incredibly well. So, but how it all works is still a bit tricky. Anyway, so Aristotle, who, you don't want to be careful citing all these people. Like, maybe I should pull out his worst quotation. I actually kind of really don't like that in books, so maybe I should be careful. But, it's fair to say this is an old, it's more than the sum of the parts. Like, it's different to the sum of it. It's different is really the thing. Linear algebra is equal to the sum of the parts. So we can connect back to, and people you can agree or disagree with who have thought about these things in different spaces. So this is Hayek, of course, got a Nobel, but Wright's thinking about, talking about markets being emergent, right? And that's sort of the behaviors of the market being emergent, and that this, sort of, I think there's a presumption that if people, all behave in some certain way, then good things will happen, right? I mean, or that the system will be good. I mean, even if it's just everyone be selfish, right? The sort of the Randian philosophy, right? That would be that's collectively going to make a better world. So there's just the origins of the word. So taxes is made, right? So it's enforced, and then cosmos is this kind of grown thing. So, and he had talked about these sort of hierarchical and decentralized structures. And we have a paper from years ago in PNAS about organizational robustness. And I was just thinking about it yesterday because John Deere is in a lot of trouble, right? There are the worker, walkouts and protests and so on, going on strike. There's that, but that's symptomatic of the whole thing not going so well. I grew up with John Deere tractors in Australia. John Deere's from Vermont, right? Was born in Vermont, but I think did some of the work in Michigan at least. It's very famous, right? The Little Johnny was the green tractor we had. Ride-A-Mower. So, a really famous brand, but it's been pushed more into this kind of side of things because, you chisel away and make it more efficient, make it, you outsource stuff. It becomes this just-in-time processes. It becomes, really this kind of lean machine. Of course, it makes more money. It's good. But then when the environment shifts, like a pandemic, supply chains get messed up and things like that, then you're in trouble. We'll see that with the forest fire model, this HOT model. It's exactly that, right? You can have this system that's functioning well, potentially catastrophically, but it's functioning okay. But if the environment it's in changes, you're in trouble. So we get to hierarchies, right, when problems are solved. I mean, it's this sort of idea of the military, which isn't true, right? The military does have a hierarchical structure, but of course, it has lots of other kinds of connections, and some of them made very purposefully. Similar things will happen in companies where you move engineers around, for example, to give them different experiences. We sort of have that idea with sabbatical, but maybe it's broken now. But like you get people to spend different times. When we have it with exchange students, right? That idea that you spend some time somewhere else. So that's sort of breaking out from a pure hierarchy, right? And that's a good idea. It's a adding some more knowledge and weird connections into systems that may help if something goes wrong or something needs to be innovated. But if you've got a really efficient thing, you just make the widgets, right? Just make the widgets, which is all good until no one wants to buy rubber ducks anymore. And then the decentralized ones help solve problems. So this is sort of a typical kind of transition for organizations, right? There's this kind of crazy startup world. It's a mess. We like to kind of live in that space intellectually. We have messy things, and then out of them become. Well, it depends. It depends how long you can maintain it. Places like Google tried to maintain that. Now it's like some big thing full of lawyers, right? Like I saw a line the other day. In the end, only the lawyers will make money, which is maybe true. But Facebook, tiny thing. Now it's gigantic. Some of them have stayed pretty small. I don't know how big Twitter is now, but these are just recent ones. The transitions to larger things. Can they keep that culture of creativity? Google famously had one day a week, you're allowed, 20% of your time you can do whatever you want, which was a good idea. And then they sort of famously had all these things they created and then they would just close them down kind of reliably. So that became sad. Yeah, this is an old thing. So this is Dewey Decimal System, which is one man's view of the world from the 1800s, like categorizing everything from I think Massachusetts, not this Dewey, right? Different Dewey. And then versus what emerged with online with tagging, right? So here's a thing, and you can add a few little keywords and what was called tags. The word folksonomy, what is it? Folksonomy, yeah, was sort of came up. It was taxonomy by the folk, right? Folksonomy. So folks and then O-N, what? Yes, okay, yeah.
So I got interested in open source, the open source movement.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm wondering if you would be willing to say that it's the same thing. Like even the Linux Foundation, it was centralized, or there's a lot of code developers who like the hierarchies took over, and it's not different from any other kind of listings.
Yeah, and people also expect that to happen a little bit. So someone's waiting, probably the oldest brother in a family wants to be the CEO one day, and it'll change from that. And it's because Linux had so many versions. Some of them are like that. I think Red Hat is, like a big, serious, right?
So I'm wondering if they fight over this kind of entropy of the organization. Anyway.
Well, no, it's a survival thing. It's like, I mean, you don't want to boil everything, but it's like, making money, like a flourishing, Linux has gotten big enough through the 90s or whatever, and then Red Hat becomes this enterprise thing. And now it's like everywhere, and you need serious, it needs to be serious. It can't be just Linus Torvalds, correcting things. But he did maintain ultimate power for a long time. I don't know where it is now.
Well,
he got into trouble. Yeah. So there you have the brittleness of building something around one person. We like it because it's a good story, and of course he fundamentally did things, right? He really built something. And, you know, or like Martha Stewart, right? I mean, it's a, actually, I mean, sort of, you know, she survived, but it's a, you know, when the brand is tied completely to one person, you know, I mean, maybe they just have an accident and pass away. I mean, then it's sort of like yeah, you haven't got something that keeps going. It is his name, of course, Linus.
Like he famously said, like it is interesting, but at the same time, he's not a genius. He will say that he's lazy to do all that stuff, so he will let other people do it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the open source kind of idea. So anyway.
Well, I mean, open source was, yeah, well, because it ran on fun and interest, right? It didn't, traditionally you were doing it without getting any money.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
And which was weird to economists and everyone else. But I mean, people love doing things. I mean, look at hobbies. Look at, you know, like people go to sports stadiums and yell at referees for, you know, and pay money to do it. So, you know, like as soon as you pay someone to do things too, it changes the way they work. Yeah, now it's like you're on the clock. Maybe it's not creativity. But Linux is big enough that it has all the different little, like Ubuntu maybe it maintains a flavor of.
And I mean, there's all this social process like reputation that comes into
That's right.
as well.
That's right.
So, yeah, there's a lot of
which isn't necessarily great, right? But you're the one who made this module, blah, blah, blah. Yes. Yeah. No, you got, right. There was satisfaction, yeah. But yeah, so but it was an enormous threat to Microsoft. There's no question they hated it. And I mean, just fair enough. Everything was a threat to them that wasn't them. So, you know, they tried to destroy it. And they did it with Netscape. They did it with all these things, like just crush it. Apple's a bit different, right? They've just tried to make, they're you know, evil in a different way. I'll tell you one more, and then we'll come back. This is Coleman. We had all these computers at Columbia named after things like that. We had a Merton and a Coleman, naming things after things. People, terrible. But this idea that, right, the religion, the ambient religion created capitalism. This is sort of Weber's story, and then Coleman's like, well, no, it made people have values, and that went into their local economic behavior, and this kind of went up here. So this is trying to get to a micro story. And I'll have more about that now. But this is a difficult, you know, people kind of want to think about this. This is easier, but you have to really start to think about individuals. And part of the thing that was stopping us, we couldn't measure that very well. Or if we did, it was like based on your small sample of the world. And a very important thing to do when you think about social phenomena is to delete yourself from it, because whatever preconceptions you have or about how your uncle behaved, or, you know, your brother does this or whatever, no, you have to take yourself out of it and try to think about people in general. And anyone who turns up with an anecdote, just, they have to stop it. Just no anecdoting. A little bit, but you've got to be really, really careful with that, because it does really strangle people's thinking. Okay, I know we've run out of time. So I know you want to stay here all day, but you please leave. It's okay. We've explained everything once again. What a success. Hello, Amy.